Have you ever experienced the Oz factor, eerie silence, changes in surroundings, feeling of dread, while in the woods or countryside? What happened? I was jogging on a dirt path through a wooded area once and I suddenly felt a sense of dread, like someone was watching me from the hillside. Never felt anything like that and I spent a lot of time in the woods. I sprinted the whole way till I got back to the street. No idea what it was. Never heard the term Oz factor before. A few years ago we had a solar eclipse. In the morning you still heard the birds and at one point it just went silent. No birds, no insects, no noise of any kind for at least 3h before the actual eclipse started. Also the wind that was blowing the rest of the day just stopped. Really a strange and terrifying feeling. I saw a full solar eclipse once and it was weird. Middle of the day and everything went dark and got cold. I was in the woods with the Boy Scouts once and it was the end of the day, dusk, and I suddenly felt removed from the premises in a weird way. Not an out-of-body experience. Couldn't see myself but definitely had a strong sense that I was like watching a movie of what was going on around me. It was pretty trippy and unsettling. Lasted about 10 to 15 minutes. Look up derealization and depersonalization on Google. I live on property and we have a gate we have to get out and shut at night so that our dogs don't get out and tweakers don't get in. Northern California. One night while walking to my house from the gate, few hundred yards between them, and the gate is on a quiet road, I heard leaves crunch and looked to see nothing. Living in the woods I've gotten pretty good at being able to tell what's walking based off of the noise of the leaves, and this sounded like a human or something larger. I kinda just brushed it off and tried to not let it get to me, but soon the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my ears starting ringing, my eyes went full tunnel vision without my control. It was really one of the scariest moments I've had and I felt the presence of something lurking behind me. Not gonna lie, when I came to my senses I sprinted to my house going at least 20 miles per hour, never looking back. That's what happened to me. We get one warning. Then if we don't listen, we get a full-blown explosion and can't ignore it. Not in woods or countryside, but I get this every time I move into a new place, house, apartment, etc. It'll happen randomly at all hours, day or night. Usually it just involves me panicking for a minute, feeling like I'm being watched, hearing every single sound around me, and the place I'm in will start to look drab and grey like a horror movie, but after like a week it stops happening. So you might have anxiety. That's a pretty close description of mine, and I get it when I'm somewhere new as well. I just feel very creeped out and feel dread for a while. It feels like something is very wrong but I don't what. Happened while I was walking by an empty street to go home at wee hours at night. It was dreadfully quiet and the only thing illuminating were the street lamps. One street lamp was flickering, and by the moment I passed by it died. I felt an eerie dread and had stopped to look around. Felt like someone would jump out and attack me any moment. But the deafening silence was immediately broken with several angry honks from a motorcycle that swerved behind me. I can hear the driver shouting profanity and rage louder than his engine noise as he zoomed out of sight. He probably was scared crap too because he might have not seen me standing by the dark. Come to think of it, I wonder why I didn't hear his bike from afar when his engine is super loud. Streetlights frequently die when I pass under them. It's weird. Started in college when I would walk back to my car at night after classes and still happens to this day. My small group leader told us a story about her and her husband when they were house shopping. They were taking a look at an old farmhouse that was out in the country. The owner guy was showing them around the house, and when they got to a certain room in the basement that looked like any other room, she felt an overwhelming sensation of dread. It went away after she left the house. She later learned that the guy who had lived there a few years before had hung himself in that room. Well, it didn't happen to me but my great aunt. I think. I get confused with extended family. This happened when she was out hiking, I believe by herself. That side of the family is super into backpacking and such. Goat packing in the mountains are some of my earliest memories. Anyways, she was just enjoying her hike when I suppose she began to experience what you described. A feeling of dread, as if she was being watched. If you've ever experienced something like that you probably know that all you want when it happens is to get out and get out now. As she was completely by herself, in the middle of woods in the middle of nowhere. When she got this feeling, she immediately started quickening her speed as she hiked back to her car. As she went, that feeling did not leave or decrease at all. Instead, she felt as if she was being followed. She finally reached her car and quickly got inside. The moment she did, a full-grown cougar jumped down out of the trees, right onto the hood of her car. The cougar had been following her up in the trees all along, stalking her as she went back to her car. If it weren't for that terribly eerie feeling, chances are she wouldn't have made it to tell the tale. Dude, that's terrifying. My rig busted down at the bottom of the hill on I-5 near Dunsmuir Car. 2008. I had to sit and wait for a repair truck overnight. It's I-5 and it should be busy. I couldn't hear or barely hear traffic going by. Some kind of acoustic shadow I was in. The parking spot was just around a curve, at the bottom of a very steep hill. Tripped me out, then creeped me out. You couldn't hear a passing big rig until it went by, like a clap of thunder. I didn't sleep. Breaking down on the 5 is the worst. So creepy, especially in NorCal. When I was younger, during the summers, my cousins and I would run off and do boys versus girls forts in the woods on my grandma's property, but as it would make it too violent for I always joined the boys team to even it out. We would forage in the forest for downed branches to build with, drag stuff out of the barn or garage with my grandma's permission to build fire pits and stuff. It was great. But I remember once where my cousins had sent me off to the creek to get a bucket of water since we had an old barrel half buried in the ground to make fire in, and my oldest cousin wanted to have water on hand just in case something went wrong. I filled the bucket and stood up and then felt like I was being watched. I was like 15 when this happened, so I was old enough to just pay attention and realize that I couldn't hear birds, insects or even the frogs in the creek anymore, and the sound of running water was distant and muffled. I stood perfectly still until it passed by, and then ran like frick back to my cousins, who dismissed it and said they hadn't seen or heard anything odd. But for the rest of that summer and the next, I would not go into those woods alone. And by the time the summer after that came, we were all too old to go playing in the woods and stopped doing it, so that just stopped being a thing and I never had to go back in there again. I was walking out somewhere in Colorado on the plains and it was quiet with only a gentle breeze flowing and no cars or anyone around me. It felt like I was lost in a never-ending sea of grass. It makes me think a lot about what the settlers must have thought. I've told this story once or twice here. Up in Appalachia, I used to take long walks through the woods. One day I came up on a house falling in on itself. A wall or two was still up, that's it. All of a sudden I think to myself, if I go around the right of the house and go in back, I can go down the stairs, and there will be a door. I've come all this way, I might as well say hello. I walked around the back of the house, and there's some stairs. I walked down those, and hey, door to the left. I knocked on it, and after half a minute I hear scrabbling on the other side of the door, like they were unlocking things, and someone muttering what I think was "don't go, don't go, don't go" all at once. I realized where I was, what I was doing, and the fact that someone was about to open that door. I got the frick out of there. Big Appalachia vibes. We got weird crap in the woods for days. I had the chance to travel to Chiapas for vacation to these cabins in the Lacandon jungle. The owner warned us to not go deep into the bush as it was extremely easy to get completely turned around even if you walk only a few hundred feet in. I was following a trail, enjoying my hike in a place that was absolutely foreign to me. Mind you, I grew up near the woods and was used to hikes, so I was not ignorant about the dangers and was confident in my skills. Eventually the trail started to disappear. So far, it had been a well-defined path, but the trees started closing in and it got harder to see further ahead. It eventually disappeared completely, but I was still curious to see how it was like, so I walked further in only to be met by a wall of green. It was really hard to walk straight on. It's no wonder how so many people get lost, so I started to turn back, not wanting to risk it. The jungle is loud: birds, monkeys, insects, critters moving around, the trees, you name it. I reached a point where it suddenly got completely silent, and let me tell you, hollering monkeys around you suddenly going mute is creepy as frick. I decided to nope it out of there. I know sudden silence means trouble. Later on, When the owner got back to cook us dinner and I told him about the sudden silence, he just went, "That was probably a jaguar. It's the only big predator around this place other than crocs." It was awesome. My family has a 45+ acre plot of forest land near the Canadian border. Now, 45 acres isn't that much as far as forests go. Takes about 15-20 minutes to walk from one side to the other, and there are numerous outbuildings and cabins, and town is a 15-minute drive away, so you always know you're pretty close to civilization. Still, there have been numerous occasions where I'm hanging out in the main cabin and suddenly everything feels really trippy. I feel dizzy. It's hard to stand up. Everything is dead quiet, and if you try hard enough, you can hear a boat 4-5 miles away and that's it. My vision goes all screwy. Kind of like when you're playing a video game and there's too much on the screen so the computer can't fully process everything, and it makes me nauseous as heck. We don't have gas hookups, but I bought CO monitors just in case, and they never go off, so I'm assuming it's not that. I've never been able to figure out what causes that. Pull over to have a smoke around 3 AM and decided to walk into the woods. Sad times. As I alighted, I realize everything is completely silent, so quiet absolutely nothing. Heard some leaves crunch and I ran back to my car so fast. Haha, I'm like that every night at work. Don't want any bears sneaking up on me. Almost every single night, if I stay up past a certain hour while on the lower level of my split level house, I suddenly get this distinct feeling I'm being watched and it's time to vacate the floor. It always comes from a small half bath in the far corner. I use that bathroom regularly throughout the day with no issues, but the hairs on my arms and legs will stand up straight when that happens. For a while I felt that way about the kitchen. I'm in a single-story house, so it's all the way down at the other end of the hall, and it's not even that dark. We keep a light on in there because otherwise it's pitch black. But for a few weeks I didn't even want to look down the hall while I was getting ready for bed. I was terrified of what I might see. I was about 11 years old exploring the woods behind my house. We live in the city and, in theory, shouldn't have been able to go more than a mile in any direction without hitting a road. We had gone as far as we had ever gone and decided we'd explore even further. It quickly gets swampy and the undergrowth is bad, but there is an old vine growing that has formed a natural doorway that leads to a fair approximation of a path. We're soon very deep in the woods and beginning to get a little weirded out by how far we've gone. Just as I'm getting ready to admit that I'm freaked and we need to turn around, the path opens up on a big field with a river running through it, a giant "Welcome to Connecticut" sign like you might see on the highway laying on its side and peeling. We both totally lose our crap and go pelting back the way we came, until, totally out of breath, we come back to an area we recognize. A couple days later we decide to go back and show a couple of friends our new discovery. We can't find it. The same path opens into the neighborhood over the river, the field, the sign. They simply don't exist. I have absolutely no explanation for this. These days you could just jump on Google Maps and get an aerial view of the area to work out where you ended up. Was driving with a friend in the middle of the night. We were in the mountains heading to a cabin for the weekend. He fell asleep, so I'm just thinking about whatever, when I get a strong feeling of dread. All of a sudden I see a woman waving her arms for me to stop. I pull over and wake my friend, so he cracks the window. She's begging for us to let her in, but my friend is looking forward and yells at me to go. I hesitate for a second until looking forward and I see a man walking up in the headlights, with a pistol in his hand. I floor it and swerve around him, leaving the woman behind. This was many years ago and I still think about it. So much guilt and wondering if I was alone how it would have played out. My friend wasn't gonna open the door anyway, but I think I would have. Always felt like a horrible person for leaving. She was definitely bait. She was probably working with him, not for him too. If she wasn't, she would have told you he was coming. Even in extreme circumstances of panic, you know to tell someone that someone's after you and to let you in. Had an unseasonably warm week in February, so I decided to head out to the mountains in central Pennsylvania one night after work for a short backpacking trip. I left my car right outside the town, basically just a tavern and a general store, near the trailhead sometime after 8 PM, and started my climb up from the river toward the higher elevations. Most of the snow had melted off over the previous days, leaving the streams overflowing, and sections of trail covered with running or standing water, with rhododendron bushes growing all around. There was often no choice but to slosh straight through the water. There's no chance of keeping your feet dry in conditions like that anyway. You just stick to the center of the trail and accept it. The trail took me up into the fog, which continued to thicken with elevation, until my entire world was reduced to a 6-foot bubble lit by my headlamp. The air somehow felt warm and cool at the same time. There was a constant white noise rushing sound from the water all around that grew and faded as I walked, and the whole sensory experience had some weird effects on me. Water in my peripheral vision looked like it was writhing instead of flowing, and I had this near constant sense of light and activity just behind and to the sides of me. No unusual dread or anything like that. Just a bizarre feeling as my mind invented things to fill in the surroundings that were mostly blocked off from my senses. I pitched a tarp and went to sleep near one of those roaring streams sometime after 1 AM. I don't even know how many times I woke up convinced there was a bright light shining and crowds of people murmuring, until I opened my eyes and realized how completely black it still was, and that the noise was just the flowing water. I don't know if that's exactly what this post is about, but I guess it's a good example of how our perception of reality is sometimes just a crappy approximation of what's actually going on. I lived on a road ranch of about 30 acres, not mine, but we rented a house on it, surrounded by about 15 miles of Texas woods in every direction. Well, one day I was walking through the middle of a dried up riverbed. It was about 25 feet from the bottom to the top of the riverbed and probably 200 yards long. Well, I remember walking, it was just silent. No birds, no animals, just the wind and locusts, with that feeling of eyes watching you from above. Well, I come around a bend in the riverbed to see a mountain lion 50-75 feet away, and it's just the sinking feeling in your chest, and it looked at me for what felt like ever. I just backed up slowly back around the bend and then ran. The only time I ever went back to that riverbed was when I got chased by hogs. Frick, Texas. Sums up countryside Texas pretty well. I still love Texas though. Was being stalked by a pack of coyotes while walking back to my car by myself from fishing. I was about 1-2 miles from my car. I was on a paved path with thick woods on both sides, just a headlamp on. You could hear them yipping and howling like 30 feet away. I couldn't see them. I could hear them walking on the dead leaves too. This went on for a couple minutes. Then everything went freaking silent. I mean dead silent. I pulled out my Glock 43 just in case, and ran as fast as I could to my car. Have chills just typing this. I'm surprised. There's a pack of yotes that live on the land I camp hunt on. Every time I go out you can hear them a couple hundred meters, couple miles out circling the area as they hunt, but they've never tried coming in. This summer I went up to the Upper Peninsula during the 4th of July for a few days. We had rented an entire house just south of Horton that was on 40 acres of woods and wet marsh that backed up to Portage Sturgeon River area. Had lots of fun, mostly except for the mosquito storms that would come out like heavy snow when the sun went down. Well, the 3 people I was traveling with went to bed shortly after fleeing the beach house of another friend that was further up the way. A couple hours after I was craving a smoke badly and decided to brave the back porch for a quick one after spraying myself down with off and putting on long pants and a hoodie to try and avoid being eaten alive by the mosquitoes. The house we were renting had this like breezeway porch arrangement in back I let myself out through, and there was short mowed sandy grass maybe 50 feet out from the house and then tall grass field before that became forest. It was foggy and near pitch black with clouds, and as I'm standing a few feet away from the house so I don't wake anyone up with the smell of smoke, all the natural sounds suddenly halt. Just nothing. Not a dang freaking sound, like I've suddenly gone deaf. I think that's a bit odd, and then all the hair on the back of neck stands up and I'm filled with dread. It's so dark and foggy I can't see more than maybe 10 feet away from me, even with some lights coming from the windows in the house. I'm not even done smoking, but I throw my cigarette out and sprint for the back door and close it behind me as fast as possible and stare out the window and the door because for some reason I'm suddenly terrified. I end up taking a shower to get the bug spray off me before bed and pass out watching something on my laptop. The next morning it's a little foggy still, but nothing like the night before, and I go out back again for a smoke and walk out just a little further than I was the night before. Maybe another 15 feet to where this yard has a couple sand pits for horseshoes. And as I look down I see what looks like giant dog prints in the sand and realize they must be wolf prints because there are no nearby neighbors and I doubt a Great Dane was wandering around in the middle of the night. Still kinda gives me the creeps thinking if I had wandered a bit further out into the dark to take a leak or something absent-mindedly or been distracted by my phone or something. I love stories like this, of survival instinct just kicking in. You hadn't even seen the wolf but thousands of years of trying to not die in the wilderness just conditioned us to develop a feeling of frick this crap, run, now and that's just so cool to me. Yes, true story. My grandma lives up in the mountains in a little house in this little mountain town of about 90 people. Tiny place, very remote, very peaceful and beautiful. Her house is on this old dirt road, surrounded by forest on all sides. No other houses for about a mile. I spent a lot of my summers there. Wonderful memories. She currently lives out of state with a friend, so the house has been empty for about 2 years. I make the drive up about once per year just for upkeep. So one trip I am up there, and I go out front on the porch at about midnight. It's very cold, maybe 30 degrees, and pitch black. It's so dark. I love it. Coming from the city, you never see darkness like this. Something I like to do is turn off the porch lights and close the front door, and then it's truly dark. It's like stepping out into space. So I turn off the porch light, close the door, then walk out into the blackness until I'm on the dirt road, and just stand there in the cold, looking up at the stars. No moon. Very peaceful and quiet. I'm out there for about 5 minutes. I start hearing something. It's faint. Pat, 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 pat. I can't see crap around me. It's pitch black. I can only see the stars. I'm straining my ears and focusing. Pat, 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 pat. It's getting louder. Pat, 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 pat. My freaking heart freezes. It's the sound of feet running on dirt road, towards me, and it's so freaking close now. It's right on top of me. Pat, 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 pat. I turn and I sprint towards the house. I almost scream out loud. That's how deliriously terrified I was. I get in the door, slam it shut, heart pounding out of my chest, turn on the porch lights and look out the window. Don't see anything. I then go and turn on every light in the house. Go to every bedroom, and look out every window. You can't see anything. It's pitch black outside. But still, I did not sleep well that night. Next morning, went outside. Found nothing. Saw nothing unusual. Freaked me out so bad. I don't go outside at night anymore when I am up there. The end. There is something so terrifying about the sound of bare feet running to me. Chills. When I was 9, I was walking the road by my friend's house in Clarksburg, West Virginia. It also happened to be right alongside about 8 square acres of woods. Something made me stop dead in my tracks. Nothing I saw or heard, just a feeling that told me don't take another step. 30 seconds later, I see this freaking brown yeti looking thing, covered in dead leaves and fur, bust out of the woods, and it just hauled butt down the road upright faster than I could run after it. The weird thing is, that sucker couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall. It was about 3 feet tall, standing upright, covered from head to toe in light brown matted fur, and built like a frickin' silverback gorilla. It made absolutely no sound, even while it was running. No one has seen what I've seen before or since, and everyone at the time thought I was just making it up. I was walking through Riverbed Park in NC. I felt like something was compelling me to stray from the trail into the woods. I stopped and tried to get my bearings. Thankfully a group of people walked up on me and I tagged along with them. That was straight up eerie. I've had this happen before. It's like you have the motivation to do something as if someone had politely requested it but nobody said a word. Just weird. I hope this counts. But this happened a few nights ago. I was taking my dog out for a walk down by a small boardwalk park area, and to my surprise when we arrived, we were one of 2 cars in the whole parking lot. I thought that was pretty unusual. It was around 6:45 PM and it was pretty dark outside, but it is typically a more safe place to walk and it's a perfect place to go for a walk on an autumn night. Anyways, My dog and I began to walk along the boardwalk and it is eerily quiet. There is a lake nearby and instead of hearing the soft sound of the waves like I normally do, it was like the water held perfectly still. It was dead quiet. My dog is pretty headstrong and likes to sniff around everywhere and I'm usually having to keep up with him. But this time he stayed close to me. I tried to give him a treat, to let him know it's okay and he can go explore, but he didn't take it and stayed right by my feet. The path is pretty lit up but I decided to take out my phone to use the flashlight and when I reached into my pocket I didn't feel it and I realized I had left it at home. We were only about 5 minutes into our walk at this point and I thought I could just go without it as we'd only stay out for maybe 5-10 more minutes. We kept going and now my dog is walking just a little ahead of me and then he just stops. I immediately get the sense that something is wrong. I can't put my finger on it. It wasn't dread or I didn't feel like someone was watching me but I just didn't feel right. I pulled on my dog's leash and told him we're going home and I have never seen my dog react to those words so much. It was like we couldn't get back fast enough. He could walk all day so this was extra unusual. We ended up speed walking back to the car and we got out of there but the whole ride home I had that creepy, hair-raising feeling in the pit of my stomach. Did something happen there that night? I live on the edge of a state forest. I've only had one night I got freaked out. It was about 2 in the morning. I was smoking a cigarette outside and it just got really quiet. I'm talking absolutely nothing. I heard something sprint across my yard about 50 feet away. It was freaking quick. I just felt really uneasy and ran back inside. It was probably just a deer or something but it rattled me for some reason. I was out on a small local lake once, and all of a sudden everything just stopped. The sound of the ripples hitting the pontoons, the gentle rocking, the birds, the crickets, everything was quiet. We cranked it up and tfo. That's always smart. Most of the time smaller animals will notice a predatory species before we will, and it's always a good idea to follow the signs and leave while you have the chance. So here's probably something you didn't want to know. When you're in the woods and suddenly things get very quiet, it's likely because there's a predator nearby. The reason you start to feel uneasy is due to an evolutionary response our species developed way back in our hunter-gatherer days. We started noticing when all the prey went silent and those of us who panicked and left the area survived, while those of us who were indifferent became meals. This feeling is often what we call our sixth sense, the feeling of being watched. And we're actually pretty good at using it subconsciously. So, if you're ever in the woods and you suddenly get the feeling that you should leave right now, it's a good idea to listen to that urge because odds are high that you're actually in danger. It's one of our leftover survival instincts that we don't really need these days, but is still highly accurate. Yep, largest predator of our proto-hominid ancestors was big cats. Wolves are pack hunters, cats are solo. Finally, I can actually talk about what happened this past summer. I live in rural town just a bit south of Colorado Springs. One morning, my mom, older brother and myself decided to go hiking. We went to our usual spot since it's secluded and not very many people know of it. We parked my car near a giant field. It's normal to see at least a couple of deer elk grazing in this wide open field, but on this particular morning we saw none. We got our backpacks on and started walking up a path that led to a nearby loggers road which hasn't been used in years. Once we got to the road and started walking a bit further I realized how eerily quiet it was. Now, I've been hiking here almost every single summer since I was a teenager. The forest here has its usual sounds, birds, insects, but once we all stood still and stopped talking the silence was nothing like I've ever experienced. We stood for a few moments when I felt like someone or something was watching us. Just a complete feeling of fear. We turned around and headed back to the car. Come to find out a few weeks later 2 hunters within the same area came across something extraterrestrial. I'll link the story if I can find it, but definitely the most freaked out I've ever been. Yes, backpacking through the Colorado Rockies with a boyfriend. We both got to a clearing we decided we camp at that night. Started to set up the tent and then everything just got quiet. Like as in no sound quiet and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I told him to pack the crap up. We were going. He tried to argue but I'd had enough experience at that point to realize boyfriend was just tired and also you don't frick around in the woods if you get that get out of here feeling. So we hiked back down the trail we were on 2 miles until we got a much friendlier place, and we camped there, no incident. The next day my then somewhat clueless boyfriend wanted to hike back up that trail and I was like, nope. We spent the entire summer out camping, never had that effect anywhere else but there. I have no idea what that was all about, but I didn't want to find out either. When the woods go still like that, it's not a good thing, especially in the middle of the day. I didn't know it's called the Oz factor. Nice. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.